Buongiorno, bentrovati, benvenuti a questo nuovo episodio dell'Illimity Talk, oggi dedicato a scoprire qual è il mindset di un imprenditore per affrontare le sfide dei nostri giorni. E allora partirei da una, forse leggenda, non so come definirla, riguarda un personaggio molto discutibile che conosciamo tutti dalle cronache di questi giorni, Elon Musk, oggi alle prese...
Molto discusso più che molto discutibile.
Vabbè, anche, vediamo poi dopo tra un attimo, avremo qualche sorpresa perché ho indagato sulla nostra ospite la sua opinione e ci rivelerà qualche fatto interessante, che appunto oggi è alle prese con questa vicenda, non si sa ancora come finirà, ma all'epoca quando era a capo di Tesla venne a sapere di un gioco da bambini. Il gioco consiste in questo: si prendono 20 spaghetti crudi, 1 metro di scotch, 1 metro di laccio e la gara consiste nel chi fa la struttura più alta che è capace di reggere un marshmallow, quindi quei bonbon zuccherosi che piacciono tanto ai bambini americani. Bene, Musk rimase molto colpito dal fatto che quando facevano le sfide i bambini delle elementari vincevano sempre rispetto agli studenti delle business schools. E questo perché, diceva come la spiegazione di chi aveva indagato il fenomeno, gli studenti che erano abituati ai concetti universitari pianificavano la possibile struttura più alta e cercavano poi di adeguare le mosse rispetto a quel piano iniziale, mentre i bambini facevano i bambini, quindi provavano, rompevano, riprovavano e il risultato è che vincevano i bambini. Ecco, questo, ripeto, non so se è una leggenda o se è una cosa vera, fatto sta che quando Elon Musk decise di avventurarsi nella sua impresa spaziale con SpaceX, rifiutò i piani business plan che gli erano stati preparati da economisti e manager che si erano laureati a Stanford e andò in Unione Sovietica, scoprì gli arsenali di razzi dismessi dell'ex impero russo e comprò tutto e cominciò a provare. Lanciava razzi, testava, li disintegrava uno dopo l'altro, ne ha fatti esplodere a decine, a centinaia, rivendicando questo errore con delle foto che pubblicava, guarda caso, su Twitter, quasi con orgoglio, circondato di rottami. E tutti lo sbeffeggiavano. Fatto sta che, lo sappiamo, dopo un po' lui è riuscito ad agganciare uno dei suoi vettori di SpaceX alla Stazione Spaziale Internazionale. Poi è riuscito a portare questi razzi indietro sulla Terra e ora la NASA gli ha affidato il compito di portare la missione che tra qualche anno arriverà sulla Luna e lui dice che dentro il 2030 ci porterà anche gli uomini su Marte, non solo Luna, su Marte. Ecco, tutto questo per dire, poi scoprirete che questo esempio non è del tutto corretto, che però questa storia mi ha fatto evocare un po' quello di cui trattiamo oggi, che è oggetto di un lavoro che va avanti da 20 anni di una ricercatrice americana, ma di origine indiana, la quale si è posta il problema di come ragionassero gli imprenditori esperti, quelli di successo, non solo quelli di successo, quelli esperti, quelli che sapevano il fatto loro. E si è accorta, andandoli a intervistare uno dopo l'altro, che non erano tanto i concetti appresi nelle tradizionali scuole di business che li muovevano. Nelle loro parole, nelle loro interviste comparivano poco termini come ritorno negli investimenti, punto di pareggio, queste cose che si insegnano, no? Ma la loro attitudine era quella di provare, partire con quello che c'era a disposizione, non avere paura di sbagliare quel poco che era possibile sbagliare, correggersi, ma soprattutto più che cercare investitori, cercare dei partner, coinvolgere persone nel proprio progetto, quindi farsi finanziare con le azioni, con le competenze. Ecco, tutto questo, che tra un attimo chiariremo molto meglio di come sto cercando di fare io, ha un nome che è stato codificato con un libro molto interessante, si intitola Effectuation, e che ha una serie di punti chiave che vengono ora insegnati in molte scuole di business, che un po' contraddicono in parte, ma non solo, non tutto, in parte, quello che tradizionalmente viene insegnato. E allora oggi proveremo a confrontare le ricerche, gli studi di questa ricercatrice americana, indiana-americana, con l'esperienza umana e professionale di una persona che voi tutti conoscete, che non solo guida un'importante banca come illimity, ma che in passato ha gestito situazioni spesso spigolose, aziende pubbliche come Poste Italiane, aziende private come Banca Intesa, ha gestito un un governo, un ministero governativo, ha tentato anche una carriera politica, quindi ha 1000 sfaccettature per raccontarci il suo punto di vista sulle teorie che andiamo a illustrare. Allora, vi ricordo che alla fine potete tranquillamente alzare la mano e fare delle domande ai nostri ospiti, però che vado a presentare. Intanto lei ha vinto proprio di recente un premio, il più importante premio mondiale sulla ricerca legata all'imprenditoria, insegna imprenditoria e etica all'Università della Virginia e ha scritto appunto il libro Effectuation. Buongiorno e benvenuta Saras Sarasvathy. Welcome, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
L'altro è il padrone di casa, non avrebbe bisogno di presentazione, il fondatore e l'amministratore delegato di Illimity, Corrado Passera. Buongiorno.
Let me thank Saras. It's really an honor, it's a pleasure. I mean, she will talk about something that for us is very relevant because we believe ourselves as an entrepreneurial bank, but what is even more important, we support. I mean, our mission is to support entrepreneurs. So the kind of research and the kind of interpretation of the entrepreneurial mindset is very, very relevant for us. So thank you very much for being with us.
It's delightful to be here, and I fully expect to enjoy our conversation.
For sure.
First of all, how did you come up with the idea of investigating the mindset of the entrepreneurs? What was the spark?
Okay, I like to say I was in the bathtub. No, right? People ask this question as though it's some kind of brilliant thing, but in actual fact, it is very simple. Before coming into academia, I had been an entrepreneur myself. In fact, my first identity, even today, is an entrepreneur. I had co-founded 5 ventures. So when I decided to come, and one of the things I had learned over time was to say, why aren't we teaching entrepreneurship? Because in those days, there was no entrepreneurship education anywhere. And people are sort of reinventing the wheel again and again and again. And there are many, many aspects of it that is actually teachable and learnable. So that was the intuition behind wanting to do something and becoming an educator. And I had never been to the US, and when I came to the US and learned a little bit about the university system and the research system, I fell in love with that, and I said, I'm going to do it the right way. So my question was very simple, practical question. If I'm going to come into a class and teach students to become entrepreneurs, what should I be teaching? And at that time, research was non-existent. There were no PhD programs. But in teaching, what people did was people like me, right, who had some entrepreneurial experience, would come into class and they would tell their war story, and then they would generalize from their experience. I did this and it worked for me. And the implication is, so it will work for you also. Or I did this, it didn't work for me. So people were just talking about this, and it was for somebody who has been doing it for a while, but now taking a more serious attention to it as to what we should be teaching. I started realizing there is a lot of contradiction, right? Like an entrepreneur would say something like, you have to persist, be a pit bull, never give up. And then 10, 20 minutes later, some student would ask, like, what did you do? How did you decide this? And they would say, oh, you have to know when to quit. And I'm like, if you actually think about it, which one is it, right? Am I persistent or I have to know how to? So there were these little paradoxes that were coming. So I started realizing that we need to think about this much more systematically than we have been thinking. And I was at Carnegie Mellon University. And so I said, I want to research this question. What is teachable and learnable about entrepreneurship beyond, of course, the toolbox? I mean, we need to still teach people to cook, right? We still need to teach the basics of accounting and finance and marketing. So you have to know the difference between just revenues and cash flows, right? There are lots of things that we do. The basics are still the same, but the idea really was, what is it that entrepreneurs learn? Okay. That is in addition to what you do in a company that's already up and running. And in Carnegie Mellon, because they had invented methods to study expertise as part of their cognitive science program, which led to the development of artificial intelligence, it was Carnegie Mellon and Herbert Simon played a major role in that. So they had invented the method. So again, nothing brilliant. I thought I can take this method, apply it to entrepreneurship and study. So here is the brilliant idea, right? To study entrepreneurship as a form of expertise. So my focus always has been not everything can be learned and taught inside a classroom, but way more can be learned and taught than this idea that you just have to go out and try it, right?
You knock the door to the entrepreneurs, to expert entrepreneurs to understand how they manage the company. And can you briefly tell us, you identified 5 principles of effectuation. Can you tell us what they are?
Yeah, so can I tell a little bit of the story of the research as well? So the method involves going to experts and asking them to talk aloud continuously as they solve the problems. And so I defined an expert entrepreneur as somebody who has 15 years or more starting and full-time experience starting and running companies. Everything, including failures and successes, multiple ventures, and at least one proven performance, taken one company public. So 245 people qualified, and I wrote to all of them, and 45 people agreed to participate in the study. So I would go out to them with this 17-page problem set of 10 decisions, and I would ask them to go through this. So this was like an experiment. So when you talk about knocking on the door, it was a combination of this experiment first and then an interview. So I didn't just go and ask them, what did you do or what did you learn? Because again, you will get 45 stories and there will be interesting things that we can study, but I wanted to go one level deeper. I wanted to show scientifically not just what they say they did, but how they actually apply what they have learned in making finance decisions, marketing decisions today, right? So I made them all go through the exact same set of 10 decisions. So now I have something that scientifically I can show that when a very experienced and expert entrepreneur is faced with a marketing decision, here's the information they look at, here's the information they ignore, and here's how they go from point A to point B to arrive at the decision. So the decision they arrive at may be different. I was not interested in which decision, but I was very interested in how they thought about the problem.
How much time did you take
so
for
each,
every interview?
So each experiment, I asked them for 2 hours. And in most cases, they were able to finish the experiment between 90 minutes to 2 hours. But then they got very curious because they were not expecting to do this. They thought it would be an interview. So afterwards, the interview sometimes would last much longer. There were a couple of people who spent 4 hours because they got very interested in the study itself and the instrument and so on.
So
but at the very least 2 hours.
Let's try to understand what effectuation is.
Yeah.
Okay, the
so
5 principles.
Correct. So the findings from this study were 5 heuristics that we now call the 5 principles. So the first thing I noticed from these entrepreneurs was they were doing something peculiar about the data that I was providing. So they would say, I hate market research. I mean, I'm giving them market research data, asking them to make a marketing decision, and they would say all kinds of nasty things about market research. And so that became the first little finding. Why is it that they don't like? Maybe these people are very, very successful, and so they're just very, they think they know everything. They don't really need to do market research. But it turned out it was not that simple. It turned out that whether it's a marketing decision, finance decision, hiring, every decision, they are actually sort of trying to not rely on predictive information. And in fact, one of them said it beautifully. Prediction about the past is great. So all the market data you want to give me about what people have done in the past and what they're doing, all of that is relevant. But if I ask you, I'm making this, will you buy it? I don't trust your answer, right? And so the idea is predictions about the future. So once I got the insight, you will see all 5 principles actually minimize the use of predictive information. I know I'm going technical and academic on that, but let me just explain the principle, which is what Massimo wants to do, so it's easier. So the first principle I usually, and they don't have to be in order, I'm just explaining to you in order. The first one is the bird in hand principle. principle. And here the idea is we usually think of problem solving. We start with a goal and we ask ourselves what are some ways we can achieve the goal, which is the best way. Or we say, let's be creative, let's invent some new ways of achieving the goal. Whereas these expert entrepreneurs are doing the opposite. They may or may not start with the goal. The most important thing is not the goal. The most important thing is what is within my control, what is my bird in hand. So it's a means-driven approach to problem solving. So you're always dividing the world into what is within my control, what is not within my control. I don't worry about the things that are not within my control. But given the things within my control, I ask myself, what can I do? So it's almost like the goals or even the small sub-goals, the immediate goals, emerge from the means. So that is so it's work with the bird in hand. And then once you start thinking about your bird in hand, which is things like, who am I? What do I know? Whom do I know? You immediately ask yourself, what are some things I can do with that could be valuable, that could be built into a venture? And the moment you think that, you also will get more than one idea. I mean, some people will say, I have no idea. But mostly, once I begin explaining it, you will come up with like 20 ideas. And you say, which one should I actually do? So the first step there is to not worry about the expected return. So normally we say, if you have 2 different projects to invest in, think about the one with the highest expected return, right? And the entrepreneurs, again, inverted it. Instead of expected return, the upside, they would look at what is my affordable loss. So they are trying to keep the downside within their control. So given my bird in hand and my affordable loss, I decide on doing something. And that could be just one evening, right? I come up with that, and then the next day, now we come to the third principle. Bird in hand, affordable loss. Third one is I start talking to people. And when I am talking to people, again, because this is the effectual way, you don't clearly know exactly what you're going to do, and you don't know what the upside will be. So I cannot go and pitch you and say, here, give me $2 million because this is what. You still have some idea and you'll still try a pitch, but what you're trying to do when you're talking to people is to allow them to self-select into your venture. And good people, whether they're investors or high potential employees or vendors or anybody you think of, will want to be part of this venture, not because you have a great vision, the effectual entrepreneur has a great vision, but because they can see something that they can do with you. It's their vision of your idea, if you will. And that is the crazy quilt principle. And that is the one that is the heart of effectuation. It's the hardest to teach, where a lot of our research in the last 10 years are going on. And this is also an explanation for black swans that we can talk about later. But the idea is you're talking to anybody and everybody. That's why it's a crazy quilt, right? Because you're not targeting particular people. And then along the way, there will be all kinds of surprises, negative as well as positive surprises, but negative surprises. That's the lemonade principle. So life throws lemons at you, and you start thinking of the lemons. Always you're looking for opportunities, even in the bad things that are happening to you. And I'm sure that Corrado can talk a lot about on how to do that.
He likes a lot.
Yeah, and the last one, and the most important one, is the understanding and the worldview that the future is not something that is already determined by the past, in the sense that just trusting trends and predictions are not enough. You can actually shape and co-create the future. That what people do is where the future comes from. Even though trajectories and trends have an impact, the fact is that we have more control than we think we might have. So it's about the co-creating the future. It's a co-creation principle. Sorry, it took a while, but rest of the time we can go.
It was necessary. It was necessary.
Corrado Passera, what do you think about this principle? Are they valid also for the Italian scenario? What is your experience?
First of all, be aware that we are applying effectuation principles even if we are not aware of it. So I have to agree, because that's what's happening also at illimity. But let me use one word coming from this book, and I strongly suggest you to read it, because it's the summary of what Saras was saying. And the statement is, in fact, effectual framing, as opposed to causal one, is about transforming the problem space and reconstituting existing realities into new opportunities, from problems to opportunities. And what comes out in a very effective way is the soul of the entrepreneur. And I just took 5 of these features, and they really give the right description of what we're talking about. An expert entrepreneur is someone who sees the world as open, still in the making. I make the world. It's not there and I have to adapt to it. It's a person who works to fabricate their new opportunities rather than consider them a given. So opportunities are not there to plan or to be used. I mean, I fabricate the opportunities. It's a person who makes rather than finds their markets. It's not only a matter of looking for a market that already exists, but it's me, it's our company, it's our effort that creates such a market. Makes success happen rather than seeks to avoid failure. We all know a number of people, especially in non-very entrepreneurial companies, where the only objective is to avoid mistake, is to avoid failures, while the real entrepreneurial spirit is to work for success. And the entrepreneurs think of themselves as a co-creator of history. So history is not something that happens in front of us. I'm a protagonist if I am an entrepreneur. Obviously, and I'm saying what I'm about to say because sometimes Sarah's theories are a bit simplified and banalized. It's not the effectuation principle against the causal, the planning, the typical planning approach to business, because it's always a combination of the two. It depends on the point in the life cycle, it depends on the quality and the experience of the entrepreneurs. So it's always a combination of these two approaches. But what really comes out is that if I have to choose between a planner and an entrepreneur and someone capable to apply effectuation principles, I certainly choose the second, because it's so much more precious and rare to find that kind of competence. One thing that came out very clearly in reading this book is that in almost all my previous experiences, and certainly also in the illimity one, the basic behavior we tried to follow was very consistent with effectuation principles, because in all cases we knew who we were, but we didn't know almost anything about the possible future. We knew what was the starting point, the values, the skills, but the world, the market had to be created. In most cases, what was really crucial were partnerships. And partnerships at the beginning are only partially foreseeable or plannable. They come along the way if you have this open mind toward partnership. And in terms of events, take, for example, our case. I mean, when we created illimity, could we expect 2 black swans in 4 years? Absolutely not. But in both cases, we went through it, we turned them into opportunities, and we became more resilient and stronger than before. I've been asked to make a very short list of these real cases. Olivetti was a company almost in bankruptcy. It was a mechanical, traditional IT company, and couldn't survive. We started on our means, on what we were, and we entered an uncharted territory that was called at that time ICT, Information and Communication Technology, and Omnitel was created, etc., but was totally uncharted, and we only knew who we were, not more than that. At Poste Italiane, we knew we were a certainly already bankrupt organization, very large, inefficient public body, but we knew that there was a treasure of trust, presence. And on those basis, we decided to turn a public body into a company, but not a company in traditional industries, in some of the most competitive ones, financial services, logistics, digital communication. And there, the keyword was to convince 200,000 people to change dramatically their behavior. And we did not know how to do it, and we realized that the most effective incentive was a non-conventional incentive, was dignity. Not money, we didn't have any money, but dignity was the real drive. In terms of partnership, again, it was an unforeseeable partnership that changed the trend. It was the partnership with the trade unions, not with other companies. In that case, was something unbelievable at the beginning, but the open attitude of the entrepreneur helped. Intesa Sanpaolo probably was the most planned project, because we had to consolidate the business, we had to buy other banks, because economies of scale were the rule of the game. But at the end, what was the real factor that changed and the whole thing and triggered the success? A very unplannable partnership. We decided to join with our main competitor, something that was not even imaginable at the beginning of the trip. And last, because here we are in illimity, we knew there was a need unmet, unserviced, SME lending. We knew who we were at the beginning, but the rest has been created through creativity, availability to change path during these 4 years. And so even partnerships, I mean, most of the partnerships on which we are relying today were not even conceivable, and those partnerships have given us the resources and the new markets we want to enter. So in all these cases, the scenario was unclear. And we didn't even try to design, to plan it. We decided to enter and change the rules of the game in most cases. Human agency has always been the case. And we always had to find the right way to create the community that at the end became the company. And if we look ahead, effectuation approach will become more and more necessary, because everything is moving in that direction. Complexity is increasing, uncertainty is increasing, technologies are more and more disruptive. So if you approach such a world and you approach it with the planning attitude, you're going to have troubles. If you approach this scenario in which we are today with the effectuation mindset, it will be a success.
Thank you.
It's so lovely. Can I ask him a question?
Absolutely. This was my question.
So there's one particular point that you made on, it was not money as an incentive, but dignity. How did you find that out? Was it instinct? Like, how did you understand that? And this is an experience that other entrepreneurs, other effectual entrepreneurs have told me about. Like one person said, initial stages I would offer bonuses, and then it turned out that person really wanted a different change in the title, and they wanted a business card that looked like that's what they really wanted. They didn't want the money. So he learned, he made a whole bunch of mistakes and learned. But in your case, how did you, maybe it was your own experience, but tell me, how did you come up with this, even the knowledge or insight?
Luckily enough, we had no money. So
okay.
The alternative was not available.
Yes.
We didn't have the money to incentivize this change with money. But I'm joking. Every time I entered a company, before judging it, I listened a lot.
Okay.
I traveled a lot in this enormous organization, 200,000 people, 15,000 outlets, 22,000 managers. And I spent the first few months just by listening to them. And I realized that they were ashamed of the situation. It was not their fault, because the general wisdom in the country was the post office does not work properly because those people are incompetent, are lazy, are totally controlled by the trade unions. Yeah. And actually, I realized it was not the case. They were not put in the position to work properly. They didn't have the means, the technology, the organization that could make them work properly. And I realized that one of the main drivers for the change was to create, again, because it used to be like that, a new proudness of being an essential facility of the country. Not only a company, not only a bureaucracy, but an organization that makes the difference in the country. And at the end, they really tried, they really confirmed it. And I remember a meeting in Sicily, and an old postman stood up and said, listen, before you came, in our little village, the bank was the god, and we were sort of the poor. Now we don't even see them. And that was the evidence of the transformation from shame to proudness. Yes. And that was a very strong incentive to change, because the change was very strong.
And this is a lovely example, both of the crazy quilt and the lemonade principle, right? You have actually transformed what people experience as a negative into that's an opportunity for you to fix that. And also you see that the moment you fix that, and then you're able to create a whole other set of possibilities.
But it needs time. You have to be the first example of that behavior. You have to defend the company. You have to save the best part of the company, even if it is almost a bankrupt company, but there is always something very good in it that you have to save and valorize.
And in the meanwhile, you have to make presentations based on plans to investors and other stakeholders. Yeah, obviously, everything has to happen.
Obviously, she's working for your next book, because you are interviewing Corrado Passera instead of me. Okay,
absolutely.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you.
I warned you, didn't I?
I'm joking. I want to ask you a very short answer at Twitter. Corrado Passera talked about human dignity as a key point of the strategy of effectuation. And before I mentioned Elon Musk, that is a potential effectuation guy. Yeah. But we see in this day, he's behaving with his employees in a with very little concern for human dignity. What is the limit in between effectuation and do whatever you want?
It's an excellent question. In fact, the entire effectuation community is dealing with the whole Twitter storm on, Elon Musk is behaving like a radical effectuator, and people are like, what do you mean by that? So apparently now I have to defend Elon Musk. I don't understand why. But the simple and a little bit academic answer is that the fact that people use effectuation doesn't mean that everything they do is effectuation, right? And the whole idea of effectuation is really, instead of seeing, here is prediction that leads to control, right? So the relationship between prediction and control is one single point. The expert entrepreneurs have separated that out. So you put prediction on one axis, control on another axis, you actually get this space of different combinations of prediction and control. So there are lots of examples I can give from Elon Musk's history and the history of the venture that he has been a part of, where he has been effectuator in the sense that low in prediction, high in control, working with self-selected stakeholders. Very first company he started was with his brother. He never did it alone. But it's possible for you to move into other spaces. So you could become like a visionary dictator, right? Which is what he seems to be doing now. He's moved into this high prediction, high control, because his affordable loss is infinite. He's the richest man. I mean, it is just a crazy, and Twitter is not like a high performing company where stakeholders, they're just expecting this maverick is going to come in and somehow create magic and create revenues with Twitter. So it's a very different situation, and he's operating in a different quadrant of the space at this point in time. Okay. So this is just to make sure we don't assume that once you've been effectuator, everything you do is effectuation. And the flip side of it is to assume that effectuation always leads to good things, right? I also want to acknowledge that really bad people can use it too, right? Yeah.
This is the right mindset for an entrepreneur that want to follow the effectuation. But someone is born as an entrepreneur, but everyone else has to learn. What are the skills? What is the knowledge that is necessary
for
becoming a good entrepreneur?
For becoming, successful entrepreneur, but also good, successful entrepreneur.
Must be learned at school,
absolutely,
at university.
So at different levels. So the one skill, I think you mentioned the spaghetti challenge in your introduction. No, it's a little bit of that, right? Because there are some things that we do naturally as children that actually somehow the education system takes it out of you. The creativity, the playfulness, and things like that. And then bringing it back in becomes a little bit of a difficulty. So there are certain things by teaching, because so much of education over the last couple of 100 years has been about teaching people to think rationally and plan and things like that. So we have almost made it difficult. Now you have to learn how to be creative and playful. That is the very first thing. But here we are doing something even more difficult, which is we are getting people to try the opposite of doing that, right? So one of the skills, I think, is for people to just simply think about what can I do rather than what should I do. But also more importantly, what can I do with whoever wants to work with me? Like, how do I work with this partnership? So the question of moving to action without having everything all planned out and ready, let's learn through action, but also let's learn through interaction. And then we can teach more systematically what I call reaction. Right? So first I try to move quickly, I do the things I can do without all the time worrying about what should I do. And then I start working with people, we start thinking about interaction and partnerships. But the moment we have interaction and partnerships, you will have your views, and then there are all these other things that come. So you have to also learn how to react to each other, to the third partner who's coming in, but also to the thing that world throws at you. And that is where the prediction control 2x2 has that you can teach like an entire course or even develop a 4-year undergraduate degree program based on the prediction control. So not only to teach entrepreneurship, but any kind
for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So those are the skills. And then one of the most important things we have really taken out of the education system, but also maybe it never was there, I don't know, is this thing about failing. Right? So it is extremely important. There are many situations in the world where it is predictable and there are better ways to take decisions, and we should be teaching people how to plan and predict and analyze and get to the optimal solution. But there are also many situations where the future is simply unknowable. So taking that toolbox and trying to face this situation is not very good. And when we are facing this situation, nobody has the correct answer, right? Okay. So we have to think about our individually about our tolerance for failure, but also as a society and as an educational system, I would like to see how do we bring that in. Yeah. And if there's anybody who can help us do that, I think it would be Corrado, right?
Thank you. Mr. Passera, is the Italian school ready for this approach?
No, And education is clearly #1 issue almost everywhere in the world, but certainly in our country. If you think about the number of dropouts, if you think about the mismatch between what the schools create and the needs of the market, if you look at the number of graduate people, if you look at the number of people that become again illiterate after school, it's clearly a non yet solved problem. And in what Saras just said, we find the main directions of the change. The first one has certainly to do with one word, and the word is potential. School should develop the potential of each person, and the potential of each person is a different story. Today, in most cases, it's a sort of assembly line where everybody has to go the same place, the same speed, and only based on traditional skills. So it's really the opposite. Different speeds, different areas of strength and weaknesses, and not only rational kind of skills to be developed, first. Second, in my opinion, has to do with the kind of world we have to get prepared. We should prepare the youth to an ever-changing world, a fast-changing world. If this is the case, you have to equip them with a method to update themselves continuously. If you transfer just a certain amount of notions, I mean, they are very soon obsolete. While if you develop curiosity, creativity, method to learn, how to learn, you create people that can follow the continuous development of the world. But even more, because if it is true that the world is an ever-changing world, it means that you have to develop the capability to think out of the box. And if you develop the ability to think out of the box, you have to tolerate failures. Because by definition, if you look for new paths, I mean, it means that some of these paths will not be successful. But that should be normal. And you must equip youth, people, everybody actually, to go through failures. Everybody, I mean, for sure myself, I mean, I went through such a situation, and there can be also a very generating kind of, not easy and not comfortable, but certainly a generating phase. Third, and this is the most vague, but I am sure that we have to work on this third aspect. We have to create conscious people, citizens, consumers, workers, possibly entrepreneurs. And for sure, if you want to develop consciousness of the world where you are, you have to combine scientific approach and humanistic one, because both are needed and each of them is not sufficient. Today, we are weak on both these extremes, probably even weaker on the scientific side, but probably the combination of the two, and this is probably the most difficult challenge, because you have to instill the culture of risk, the culture of diversity, the culture of tolerance, the culture of community. That is really something we are missing. As far as business education, I would say, but it is almost an easy answer, we have to move from only shareholders' perspective to stakeholder perspective, but that's an easy one. The school, the elementary and the secondary school is where the most difficult change has to be designed.
So can I add to that? Do we have the time? So one of the things we have been working on with several colleagues is this idea of thinking about the entrepreneurial method, and to develop entrepreneurship education the way we do science education, right? That is the reason we teach science to everybody, not only to potential scientists. Anybody who can go to school gets exposed to understanding science. Why? Because we want people to be able to experience it for themselves a little bit, maybe run a couple of chemistry experiments or something, but also it teaches you how to reason, and then you end up building a scientific society, a society capable of supporting science and technology. So if you think about the book on scientific method, Novum Organum, in the late 17th, 18th century, the next 200 years of progress would never have happened if we had only decided to teach that to potential scientists, right?
Without losing the overall view.
Absolutely.
That's the humanistic.
Absolutely. They embedded it into the humanistic education system, right? And so the same with entrepreneurship. Right now, we're just teaching it to potential entrepreneurs. But if we bring it into education in a substantial way, this could be a way to teach mathematics, to teach civics, right? To teach some of these ideas of, so the self-selected stakeholder experience. The last 10 years, we've been looking on it, just the way entrepreneurs ask. Right? So that's why I asked you about how did you arrive, and you said I listened. And if I had a few more minutes, I'll go deeper into that. The way you ask questions, the way you listen, that is a skill we can teach to everybody. And people don't see that. It's not about building a business. It's about getting this thing of how do I get you to hear me and to want to put some skin in the game and work with me on my project. So it's not just teamwork. Teamwork is important too. But the humanities you learn by actually interact. So things like that. And so the argument is, let's take this stuff, break down into skills at different levels, whether it's a second grader, fourth grader, and then you just like in science, you teach different kinds of science at every level. Yeah. And some of them will become scientists and win Nobel Prizes, and similarly, some of them will build great companies.
Massimo is getting nervous.
Oh, yeah. This sentence in your book says that an entrepreneur is an economist plus imagination.
Correct. Yeah,
okay.
I'm glad you picked up on that.
Okay,
yes.
This is the poetry, and then the next question is things, real things, money. Yeah. Because we talk about mindset, we talk about learning, but how can a starting entrepreneur find his first money? You have a pretty unorthodox idea. Can you tell us?
Yes. So first of all, Massimo, you do know that poetry is actually real. Money is not.
I know.
Right? Money is just a measurement in some ways. Right? We have reified money. Now we talk about this. Money is real and poetry is not.
Absolutely. I was joking, of course.
So I had to pull you on that. And you're a writer yourself. So,
absolutely.
So we need to challenge that view. But yes, so one of the things that came out of this, working on effectuation for almost 20 years, was this idea that every time you talk to an investor, you're forced to be causal for the most part, because you're trying to pitch them and you're going to tell them, please, here's why you should invest, because there's this huge upside and we will do, so people have to, they're kind of forced in. So when in the early stages, we are trying to teach effectuation and we are trying to build teaching materials, this came up over and over again. And that got me to start thinking about how do these effectuators actually deal with investors and where do they get their money from and things like that. And then I was shocked when I started looking at the data to find that, first of all, we have over-exaggerated the role of investment and money in some ways. And let me explain that. We have to be very careful. I'm not saying that money is unimportant or useless or anything of that kind. What I want you to know, just take a look at the numbers a little bit, the basic numbers when you look at it. Most people, so US has the largest venture capital industry in the world, and out of 500,000 employer firms in the economy, less than 1,000 will get VC funding, right? So right there, you know that this cannot be the most important. So where are the rest of them getting their funding? Then you look at the Inc. 500 entrepreneurs, the high growth entrepreneurs, right? 2/3 of them never get any outside funding. Then you go look at the initial public offerings, the companies that go public, the IPOs as we call them. And it turns out only 27% of them get formal funding from outside. So 70% of them, where do they get their funding from? It became a mystery. It had nothing to do with effectuate, it just became a mystery. And so you started looking at what's happening, and it turns out that I'll come back to the argument why money is not actually real, in the sense that money is the ultimate middleman. So money is something we use in order to get other people to work with you, in a way. So how do these 70% of the companies get their funding? You'll be surprised. Take just the example of Microsoft. Who funded Microsoft? IBM funded Microsoft. And how did they fund it? They literally purchased the product and paid enough for it, underwrote the product, which then Microsoft could go sell to everybody. I can give you example after example after example where a partnership, like you said, a positive black swan situation can happen. Somebody, you are trying to do something and somebody just thinks it's awesome and they come in and they give you money. But in many, many cases, it is not money or investment at all. It is this direct relationship with the customer. And in some cases, it's a direct relationship with the vendor. And there are cases where it is the employees. I even have a case where a competitor was the one who came and said, I'm so sick of competing against you. Build something and I will be your investor, right? So this idea that partnerships are substitutes for money is really the key here. And the way we explain it, and I actually learned this from a colleague of mine who has built an accelerator in Bangalore based on this idea. It's literally this idea of scaling without capital. So the way he explains it to his entrepreneurs, now I'm just stealing the way he does it because it's a very good way. He will tell people, okay, how much money do you need? So you may say, $2 million. And he say, okay, give me your shopping list. Let's say I wrote you a check for $2 million. What are you going to do with it? And people will tell you what they're going to do with it. It will be, I'll be hiring a salesperson. I'll be hiring a designer. I'll be, in some cases, it's actually material that you have to buy. Even there, you can go and make. So he'll say each one of these items, do it the hard way. So if you want to hire a CTO, if you want to hire a salesperson, if you want to go buy, $10 million worth of material from a supplier, go make the deal with them and get them to come on board as a partner in your company. Figure out what would it take. And that's a hard way to do it. But in the early stages, if you can get 4 or 5 of those relationships, then money comes knocking on your door, right? At that time, awesome, take the money. Okay. And then I tell my students, take the money when you don't need it, and then behave as though you don't have it. And that's the way you scale. So just because you have money, don't start drinking $3,000 bottles of wine and having, special launch parties and things like that. So, that's the idea.
For an Italian, this looks like a fairy tale world. But Mr. Passera, when you were a minister of former government, you prepared a startup act that contains some part of the things that Sarah has just said, isn't it?
Yes, we had to make life easier for startupper because Italy had not the right regulation for facilitating the creation of new companies. Yep. And so regulation actually can really help because if job regulation, tax regulation, bankruptcy regulation is designed around the needs only of already large and structured companies, new companies will never happen. So we had to change everything. We had to create a new job regulation. And as far as the job regulation, I come to what Saras was saying, because if you want to create partnerships, especially with co-founders, with people that join your startup and you do not have money, in most cases that's the case, we introduced the possibility to pay with shares. That was not possible before. So we created the mechanism, as Saras was mentioning, as far as co-founder and people and employees are concerned. The most difficult change in the previous regulation was the change in the bankruptcy law, because as you know, until that law, if you failed, you sort you became a sort of rejected person for a number of years. I mean, a person that went through a bankruptcy was listed on a special register and could not start a new company for a number of years. We canceled it, but it was quite a difficult thing. In terms of funding, we introduced crowdfunding. That's another way that facilitate partnerships. We gave a state guarantee to startup to finance themselves, and that's also helped. We created the first fund of funds specializing in startups. And actually everything started. Today, if I have to identify a sort of funding that is in the middle between normal financing funding and zero funding, I see venture capital, because venture capital is the mechanism through which startups scale up.
Yes.
And that's probably the weakest component of the startup system in our country. We created quite a venture capital because, as you know, CDP Venture has now 5 billion euros worth of money to invest. But if you look outside the CDP Venture, the industry is very fragmented. What Germany and France have been doing to channel institutional investors' money into venture capital funds of funds is probably something we should do ourselves. But I take and I buy what Saras was saying before. Partnerships in most cases are the key word. As a bank, it's a bit a different story because, as we all know, if you don't have equity, hard equity, you cannot even start. So we were happy to raise the 600 million at the beginning of the story. But in most cases, the right partnerships can substitute just normal financial funding.
We are really, sorry,
Yeah,
we are really running out of time,
Okay,
so I recommend you very, very short answer, because Corrado mentioned one focus, crucial point of Italian system, that is the stigma of failure. I know that in your book you say very good word about this. Shortly, can you tell us something about the stigma of failure?
So, so there is, as I said, you have the fear of failure at the individual level. And I tell my students is failure always tastes bad. No matter which society you live in, whether there is stigma of failure or not, failure is not a good experience in the sense nobody enjoys failure. But we do not want as a society to be punishing people who are actually trying to do something. You know, there are people who could get a $200,000 job and they're still taking the time to try and start a company. You don't want to punish them because they took something on and it didn't work. So the stigma part of the stigma of failure is one of the things institutionally and especially as part of the education system, I think we can work to change that a little bit. And I think that will allow a lot more innovation to happen.
Corrado Passera, have you ever experienced a failure?
Yes.
When?
A major one. After I was minister, as we all know, I mean, I'm saying that just for Saras because we all shared these stories. I decided to try to transform the government experience into a political one. And I traveled around Italy for 1 year to listen. Then I devoted almost 1 year to Milan because the idea was to start as a mayor in my city, in my place. And I realized there was no room. There was not the possibility because that idea at that time was to create a political movement in the middle between the two main political coalitions, and it proved not to be possible at that time. Probably in a different time might have been possible. So I failed. I lost all my money because I put all my savings there. And then I started from scratch again. It was not my first time.
Stigma.
Not stigma, for sure. Some proudness for having tried. No, not stigma. Maybe for some other people was a stigma, not for me. I mean.
Is there someone that wants to ask something to our guest? No one? No one? So, okay, maybe I see a hand raised.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for sharing your view with us. And I think that what you said about entrepreneurial mindset can be summarized as ability to deal with uncertainty and capacity to take risks. And from this perspective, I would like to ask you how many enterprises led by women are there in your included in your studies, and if you noted any material differences between men and women approach to entrepreneurship and investment in general. Thank you.
Lovely question. So in the original study, where with the definition of the expert entrepreneur, there were only 3 women who qualified, right? So I wrote to all 245 at that time. I think if I did the study again today, there will be more women. But more importantly, in the 20 years hence, we have collected a lot of data on women entrepreneurs. In fact, last week there was a study that was published which showed, in fact, it won the Best Paper Award in the USASB conference, US Small Business Conference. And that shows that women are actually, they find it easier to learn and use effectual principles. So it was kind of a delightful study. I'm happy to share the study on that front. Now, there's just one other thing I want to say. In general, in the developed world, women are still lagging behind in starting ventures and running them. But in the developing countries, especially in Asia, women far outpace, and many countries in Africa as well, women far outpace men in starting a company, whether it's like a micro enterprise, but also many of those micro enterprises, a certain proportion of those micro enterprises are growing into large companies. That is one of the fascinating 2 case studies we have written on that. One is the founder of 9 Dragons Paper in China, the first woman self-made billionaire in China. And another one is Biocon in India, both are multi-billion-dollar companies at this point, publicly traded, both founded by women. And we wrote the histories and we showed how effectual the stories were, the 0 to 60 miles per hour story, and also how they then managed to become managers and bring in processes and organizational structures in place and done. So I'm happy to share those 2 cases if you want. But in the original study, only there were 3 women in the 245. So it was a different world then.
Let me say one thing, because maybe Professor Riccardo Viale, who has the merit of having created this opportunity. We are here because he was a bridge between Saras and ourselves. Maybe you want to say something, or you want to... No, you don't want to. But in any case, I have to thank you, so I took this opportunity.
And I want to thank my friend Shabnam, who I think brought me to Riccardo's attention in the first place and made this trip a delight. And so thank you, Shabnam, so much.
A very last question from both of you. You every day see a lot of young students. What is your hope for them?
For my hope for the young students? All my hope is in the young students, because if you look at history, I always tell people, history sucks, but the future is up to you. And if you take away nothing from this, take away that you can actually do more than you think you can. And I think we are living in a world where most young people in most places, I mean, look at what's going on in Iran, Shabnam, the young people are realizing that. So my hope is that they realize it, that they can actually shape the future. And then I hope on the thing that they figure out a way to bring humanities and business. So my colleague Ed Freeman is one of the founders of stakeholder theory, and he always says that there's only one story we need to fight, and that is the business sucks story, which is there in the humanities. But the way we do it is actually think about business and society, put them together, overcome this separation thesis that we have built into it. And so my biggest hope for them is that they will figure out ways to put business and society in a way that we will get to a new world which we are not even imagining today. So I'm very, very hopeful about today's youngsters. I know we all think there are all kinds of problems, but I think they're doing better than my generation and my generation before me, for sure.
Mr. Passera, you have a very young team, you have 5 children. What is your hope for them?
Is in the same direction, and if you want to put together in a very balanced way business and society, we probably have to find new balances between values that today are considered sort of exclusive. I mean, putting together freedom and equality, putting together merit and solidarity, putting together openness and identity. Today, if you look at the political world, these values are considered sort of exclusive, one or the other. And if I have to dream about a society that is nicer to live in, I have in mind a society where these values are combined. But if you want to do that, you first have to instill the love for freedom. Love for freedom, as Saras was saying, to pursue your own dreams, and at the same time, freedom from all constraints, of all fears, especially the fear of diversity, the fear of those who are not similar to you. So that's why humanities are important.
Yes, absolutely. I'm with you 100% on humanities.
Thank you, Corrado Passera. Thank you, Saras Sarasvathy, for your book, for your ideas, for coming with us to explain this.
Thank you, Massimo, for your patience.
Sui social di illimity, quindi chi vuole risentirsela o vuole viralizzarla.
Gli altri, immagino che voi non abbiate voglia di risentirlo, ma comunque.